Welcome everybody to the Leo Zagami Show! 20 years of Illuminati Confession Special Edition, Illuminati News. Here we are today, a very interesting and rather captivating show. Vatican Spirit Communication. Wow. Are they into Spiritism? Well, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about also the mysterious invention of Father Ernetti, this monk which was born in Rocca Santo Stefano, just a few miles from where I used to live, there in Subiaco, a monk who created the Chronovisor. And what is the Chronovisor? We're going to be talking about it today. In the meantime, let me thank our sponsors which make this wonderful podcast possible. By the way, we are about to publish a new book, and it's going to be a very, very, very important book, one of my most important books, and one of the few books I've dedicated to a specific topic. I've done it in the past with Invisible Master, but this time I'm really expanding on something different here. So let me tell you the title of my upcoming book, which is coming out in, let's say, a week, maximum 10 days. I don't want to give an exact date, but it's going to be available before Disclosure Day of Steven Spielberg, because it's important to understand this book also in relation to what Steven Spielberg is trying to do. Okay, so thank you so much to all of you for being here with me, and thank to our sponsors, KB Lan, thank you KB Lan, thank you Jim, you have an incredible name, Grutzmarker, yeah. Surname, not the name, but the surname which is rather incredible. You Uzumaki, thank you Uzumaki, and thank you to Peter Prokosh. Okay, if I'm butchering your surnames, please write me a mail so maybe we can get it right. My wife tells me I should use the AI to maybe interpret in a correct way some of these spellings. Anyway, thank you again, Kibilan. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Yozumaki. Thank you, Peter Prokosh. And thank to those people who really are helping this show. And at the same time, we're going to have something big coming up, because with this new book, there is going to be renewed attention on, of course, my podcast. So you're going to see a lot of things are going to happen. Anyway, share this video, put like, subscribe. You have to absolutely subscribe to my channels. We are broadcasting at the moment on Facebook, on YouTube, on X, on Rumble, and on BitChute. We are no longer on Band of Video, as Band of Video no longer exists. That's unfortunate, but that's what happened recently. So let me talk a little bit, first of all, about a couple of things that happened this week before we enter into the main topic of the day, because there has been some unusual things that have taken place this week that maybe need my commentary, let's say. First of all, this article on the New York Post, here we call it California Post, but it's always the good old New York Post, talks about a whistleblower that claims the CIA has used the DNA data from Ancestry and 23andMe, which are famous for collecting your, your saliva, for then, building a connection with all your various relatives, maybe people you never heard of who share the same DNA and so on. Now, apparently, this kind of data has been used in search for aliens. The problem which I have with this article, though, is the author of these affirmations is Gioriani. Now, Gioriani is a very ambiguous figure. I have had the possibility to encounter him within the intelligence community. Let's say that a guy who I know from the British intelligence once wanted to get me in contact with him, and so Jason Reza Gioriani is this really ambiguous figure that comes up with all kinds of outlandish claims. Some of them are actually accurate because he has, in reality, this gatekeeping function. The gatekeepers are present in today's reality, guys, and this is also a very important topic. He says that it was Lynn Buchanan that apparently alerted him. Giuliani claimed that he was alerted to this bug hunting initiative by Army veteran Lynn Buchanan. Now, Lynn Buchanan is not any kind of guy, but is the guy who, in The Man Who Stared at Goats, both the book as well as the film, he was interpreted by George Clooney. In fact, recently, there has been a lot of talk about Lynn Buchanan, who was part of the Stargate project, which we know started within both the CIA and the military intelligence, was developed, and then ultimately the CIA closed it. But the thing regarding Lynn Buchanan, latest assertions have kind of collected a lot of attention, especially because he has gone on this show with, I think, Jesse Michaels. And on this show with Jesse Michaels, he has talked about his own experiences, not only with the remote viewing, but also with, he's a former US Army intelligence operative, of course, just like it was portrayed in the movie. He basically has been all over the news these days for this statement regarding also his extraterrestrial encounters with a specific race, the mantid insectoid race, which of course he claimed to have had contact with. I mean, he is a genuine remote viewer. I mean, his credentials are absolutely serious, and so, I mean, most of what he says is absolutely correct. I mean, from his own perception, but he was there serving the United States, and he was involved in the remote viewing program. The remote viewing program was absolutely important in the development also later on of many other things. Anyway, today we are discussing the paranormal subject in relationship in relation to the Vatican in particular, and two religious figures that had an extraordinary experience that brought them to study communication with the dead. We know that when in the 1850s, after the Fox sisters started this whole frenzy, then Allan Kardec created the Spiritism. Immediately, the Catholic Church went after him and condemned any form, rightly so, because most of the time when you claim to be in contact with the dead, you are in contact with some demons. So, rightly so. But what happened that changed the idea of two very important people in the church was a direct experience they had that led to a series of organized factions of the church moving into the direction of spirit contact and the likes, which it's kind of unusual because you don't expect the Vatican to endorse spirit communication. Okay, so the story is the following, and it's a very interesting story that I'm going to tell you now. Of course, this story has some elements that are absolutely 100% certified, other a little bit less, but this article, which I'm about to show you, led then to a decision by the Vatican on this subject. So there was actually an official reaction of the Vatican. This monk, Father Ernetti, who was a monk, invented a way to photograph our past. I know this whole thing might sound crazy, but first of all, let's go back to the beginning of this story. What brought him to create this invention that allows you to see the past, not to travel in the past, but to see the past, because everything that is, that is experienced by us leaves somehow an imprint, a magnetic imprint that can be captured. The story starts in September 1952. September 1952, the Pope in the Vatican was Pius XII. It was a very different church from what we have now. It was a more traditional church. It was the pre-conciliar church. It was the church before the Second Vatican Council. Father Pellegrino Ernetti was a Benedictine monk and an exorcist, but he was also a scientist, a respected physicist. And he was also a renewed musicologist. He was an expert on, on the Gregorian chants and all that. He was in a lab with his friend and longtime colleague, Agostino Gemelli. Very important that you understand who these characters are. Agostino Gemelli, I was born in the hospital dedicated to Agostino Gemelli. I was born in the Gemelli Hospital, which is the official church where the Pope, like the last Pope, goes, all the popes go. And like I said, Agostino Gemelli was the one that was together with Padre Ernetti that day when something really happened. He was, see, this is the guy, which I'm showing you, Agostino, a very grounded guy. This is a scientist. He actually was the guy who contested a lot of what happened with Padre Pio. So there was a little bit of a controversy. Let's see if they have the English language here. But okay, so Agostino Gemelli, a monk also, so Capuchin friar from the Franciscan order, while instead I think that Padre Ernetti was a Benedictine monk, so from two different orders. But they collaborated because he was also the first rector of the University del Sacro Cuore of Milan, University of the Sacred Heart. Gemelli was a scientist. He was a physician and a psychologist. He ended up creating the hospital where I was born, the Gemelli University Hospital. So this is a brief history of the characters here involved in the story, because, guys, the story becomes a rather incredible story, and so you will have also a lot of people who have actually will have a difficulty in accepting the reality behind the story. So I wanted to make this premise because of that. Now, this is an article from The Guardian. It's an article that came out 20 years ago. It's an article, though, that talks about this whole thing. So, it says here, his gestures, his intonation, how powerful they were. What flights of oratory writes Father Pellegrino Ernetti, describing a speech by Marcus Tullius Cicero to the Roman Senate in 63 BC. Ernetti, who died in 1992, was a Benedictine monk, a respected historian of ancient music, author, physicist, and exorcist, but what makes his description of Cicero intriguing is that he claims to have witnessed it at first hand. Okay, we will continue with this article later on. Let's go into the experience that led to this experimentation that apparently involved some of the most brilliant minds of his era, including the guy who helped NASA get to the moon, hypothetically, theoretically, I don't know if they ever did, but von Braun, the famous Nazi scientist. Anyway, the experience started while these two people, Gemelli and Father Ernetti, were in a lab. They were in a lab with, you know, what they used to do, experimenting things. And what happened that led to the further invention of the Chronovisor, but also to Father Gemelli, also interest in spirit communication, which is rather incredible for such a pragmatic guy, is this. On September 15, 1952, the two people were working together on an harmonics project involving recordings of a Gregorian chant. During one session, the reel-to-reel tape recorder they were using kept eating the tape. It can happen. Everybody who, like me, has been involved into the music business in the old days, we had these reel-to-reels, they often screw up. And so it's something that keeps happening quite often at the time. Now it's all digital, it's a different kind of situation. Anyway, Gemelli was rather frustrated by this reel-to-reel that couldn't record this Gregorian chant. And I'm not talking here about some recording on an Enigma record, which they used to sample Gregorian chant. But let's say that kind of thing, okay? So Gemelli, frustrated by the situation, appealed to his dead father, said, Papa, aiutami. He said this in Italian, of course, because the two were talking Italian. Now, to the shock of these two priests, when the tape that was finally recording was played back, the voice of Father Ernetti, dead father, apparently could be heard saying to his son, "Oh, Zuccone, of course I'm gonna help you." Now, some people say that it was Gemelli's father rather than, there is, different versions of the story. But this is how the story went. Now, there is a tendency in the narrative that circulates on this story in the English language to get wrong the term zuccone. In fact, I saw articles in which it was written zucchini. Now, zucchini is a different thing. Zucchini. I eat zucchini. I just, I had a wonderful meal today. The zucchini. Zucchini is something you eat. But zuccone, it's a funny way of, when you are talking to your son and say, "Oh, capoccio, zuccone," like, you're being a little bit, It's a funny thing to say, okay? But it was something that apparently the father used to say. And so at that point, the interest of both of them, because you see, as you know, apparently Zuccone was the nickname that Gemelli's father had given to his son as a boy, and this could have not been known. It was something that could have not been known by, but it was recorded, you know, it stayed in the recording. We know that this is something that, you know, has some precedence now, especially with people who have studied the paranormal, the whole thing about recording voices, using also certain devices, capturing these voices. But first of all, let's go back. I mean, we are talking about the EVP kind of research. The two priests were kind of, you know, after this starting initial communication, Ernetti and Gemelli embarked on a journey to discover the possibility of contacting the dead. And you might say to me, but how can Catholic priests who are forbidden to talk with the dead, because there is specific rules within the Catholic Church to not engage in any form of necromancy, of talking with the dead in any way, shape, or form. Now, Gemelli, who ends up continuing the research in a more, you know, rigorous way, says we have to conduce this, we have to do this research in the name of science. So groups were created. There was, for example, you know, Gemelli created, of course, wanted to, it was the birth of the electronic voice phenomena, what I just called EVP. In fact, this event officially launched the studies in Italy of the EVP, which is also known as electronic voice phenomena, as psychophony, and is the recording of presumed voices from the afterlife using tape recorders and radio waves. But for Father Ernetti, it was a little bit more than that. Father Ernetti, this episode was like the most illuminating episode of his life. If a recorder could capture the voice of a deceased person in the form of a residual energy trace, then for him it had to be possible to build a machine, the future Chronovisor, to capture the visual and sound waves of the past. So this is very important here, because now we are entering into the a little bit the paranormal zone here, and it's a very interesting story. I mean, definitely it might be a story that people might find totally out of order or totally not in line with the Catholic thinking, but there is evidence that both Father Ernetti and Father Gemelli from that point onwards started to work each in their own way. Father Ernetti, though, eventually materialized the Chronovisor. So the direct link between Father Ernetti and Father Gemelli is this event that happened, some say on the 15th of September 1952, some say on the 17th. There is a little bit of a discrepancy there. And it happened inside the university's laboratory of experimental psychology, where the two were recording a Gregorian chant using a primitive wire recording. The wire kept breaking, but also the tape kept breaking. And so the whole situation then led to Gemelli claiming, hey, Dad, help me. And then, of course, you big head, which is Zuccone in Italian, that the father used to call, I mean, some sources say it was actually Gemelli that was altogether, the more pragmatic of the two, who had his nickname as a child and was immediately more impressed even than Ernetti. Anyway, after so these two, you see, what happens here is that Padre Ernetti, that you are seeing here on the screen, built something that at the end of his life he would be impose a complete secrecy from the Vatican, imposed silence on Ernetti at the end of his life because of this. So there is some truth to it, despite the final retraction that in a way Ernetti was forced upon by the Vatican. But let me explain a little bit what happened and how this whole thing was built. What are we talking about here? The premise of how was the Chronovisor built? Okay, so the Chronovisor. Father Ernetti devised this machine that transformed these leftovers energies that continue to roam through space. And according to the monk, to Father Ernetti, every spoken word and every action everybody does every minute, every second of the day, emits sound and electromagnetic waves. This energy is not destroyed, but dispersed. Okay, so you need to, in some way, be able to photograph this, to have a machine. Ernetti explained the practical operation of the machine, which he claimed to have built in Venice. Yes, in Venice. And he didn't build it with anybody. He built it with two of the most eminent scientists. One was Enrico Fermi, and the other one was Werner von Braun. Now, let's make a summary of the principles that guide the Chronovisor. The Chronovisor operates on exactly the inverse principles of a cathodic tube TV. This is important. A camera converts visual scenes and sounds from the past into electromagnetic waves to transmit them for broadcasting. The Chronovisor does basically exactly the opposite of what a TV does by capturing the electromagnetic and acoustic waves already present in the environment rather than transmitting them like a TV. The fact that you transmit to the TV something, in this case, this is capturing something. So it's a little bit different. Here we're seeing the images of Padre Gemelli and, of course, of Padre Ernetti, Father Ernetti. Now, the Chronovisor, the three main components of this Chronovisor. There is the device resembled, for those who have had the possibility to view it, and I actually met people who had a direct experience with Padre Ernetti about this whole thing, because Padre Ernetti was involved with the monastery of Santa Scholastica in Subiaco, because also of his publications and stuff that he was doing. He was a guy specialized in the study of ancient music, but also language. So he was definitely a genius. He wasn't just, a monk or a friar of sorts. So this machine he built was divided in three sections. One was the transducers. This was a series of antennas that were made of special metal alloys capable of capturing all wavelengths of light and sound present in the ether. Now, we talk often about synchronicity. Synchronicity for Carl Gustav Jung was what Kepler used to call forma telluris. So there is something that emanates, something that can be captured. And I guess that in a way, he had built something that could capture this. There was a frequency selector in this chronovisor, a tuning system that allowed you to set the desired spatial and temporal coordinates. So if you wanted to go back to the time of Jesus, of Napoleon, of whomever, you set up these temporal coordinates. It works similarly to a radio by turning the knobs. I mean, remember that we were in the 1950s when Father Pellegrino started to build this thing that ultimately was taken by the Vatican and never seen again. It's a little bit like the remote viewers that are given a target, like you are given a target. It can be Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Jesus, and then you are syncing with them into their specific timeline. In this case, though, you could actually photograph Jesus, photograph Napoleon, hear what they were saying exactly in a very exact manner. And of course, the most incredible experience was going back to the time of Jesus. But let's go. So these three elements, the transducers, which are the antennas, the frequency selector, and then you have the viewer and recorder. So you had a screen, a little bit like, a TV screen, on which these images were projected in black and white, later apparently even in color. Accompanied, they were brought by a speaker for audio and a system to record the multimedia stream. Almost, it was kind of very ahead of its time. What Father Pellegrino Ernetti was doing with this chronovisor. Now we don't have ultimate confirmation that the whole thing was true, because Father Pellegrino Ernetti, like we will see, was eventually silenced. However, there are specific historical moments that he was involved with, that he observed thanks to the chronovisor. And these moments were the Passion of Christ. Ernetti claimed to see the agony in the garden, the betrayal by Judas, and the entire crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Then you had the tablets of the law. He claimed to have watched Moses receive the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. Then he said he observed the speeches of Cicero. He claimed to observe Marcus Tullius Cicero delivering his famous Catiline orations to the Roman Senate in 63 BC. And then Ernetti stated he watched Napoleon give his speeches that abolished the Venetian Republic. So all this happened in the Vatican with the approval of the Vatican. It wasn't a time machine. It was a machine that read time. It's a very different thing. You couldn't simply go back in time. You were simply able to record what went on in time. And going back to Lynn Buchanan, the remote viewers, I think that one of the things he said to Jesse Magos in his recent interview was rather interesting, because he said he also had the opportunity to view Napoleon in a specific context, which was this rabbit hunting that turned out to be a little bit disastrous, because they couldn't find wild rabbits, so they got all these domesticated rabbits, thousands of them, but because they were undomesticated, instead of running from the hunters, they went after the hunters, and it was a complete disaster. But it's a little known story that then the remote viewer happened to have encountered during his experience with Napoleon. Anyway, the Christ photo, because at one point there was a lot of controversy regarding the photos that were made with the Chronovisor. Let's go and check these photos. Here, let's see. Actually, let me see if I can put it here. The various. Okay, so this is an image apparently on the left. Some say it's too similar to the one on the right, which is an artistic portrait of Jesus. Then we have another image that was captured with the Chronovisor that will end up being very controversial, and it's this one. This is a photo of Jesus that was captured through the Chronovisor of Father Ernetti. So, these were some of the experiences done with the Chronovisor, but let's move on with our story. The machine, like I said, was created in Venice, and then, of course, the experience became known all over the scientific world, but the Vatican apparently became kind of wary of what was going on with this whole thing. Especially when Father Ernetti started to transcribe fragments of lost text from the past. This, in particular, there were some anomalies, though, that some linguistic anomalies that were then analyzed by classic scholars that said it doesn't really fit the time. Anyway, the focus of our story and what Father Ernetti managed to capture with the Chronovisor was made possible also thanks to the collaboration of Enrico Fermi. Enrico Fermi, guys, we're talking about the guy who invented the famous Fermi paradox. We are talking about one of the guys who has really changed the world. I don't know if he changed it for the better, but he was a member of the Manhattan Project. So the Manhattan Project, as we know, is the project for the research and development of what became the first atomic bomb. So here we have Enrico Fermi. Then we have also Werner von Braun, and they both collaborated with Father Ernetti on the creation of this Chronovisor. Von Braun, of course, has done a much better job than Jeff Bezos has ever done with his failing Blue Origin. Yes, but the Chronovisor wasn't done in Los Alamos. It was done in Venice. But yes, it was done with Enrico Fermi. Enrico Fermi was, at the time, before going back to Italy, Enrico Fermi was, of course, in Los Alamos and was in New Mexico. He died in 1954, but 2 years before dying, apparently he collaborated with Father Ernetti on this project, which is the Chronovisor. Let's go back to, after having explained how it works. Let's say we have explained how it works, but we want to also go back to the various controversies connected to this machine, which arise from this machine, especially when this machine started to be known around the world. So here we have The Guardian in 2005 that says, Ernetti actually told the French theologian Father François Brun that he watched it live on a time warping device called the Chronovisor. So he reported the speech of Marco Tullius Cicero thanks to the Chronovisor. Ernetti claimed to have developed the Chronovisor during the 1950s with 12 famed scientists who, except from Enrico Fermi and Werner von Braun, both dead when their names were published in 1992, because that was when the story was eventually also published in a book in Italy. I think it was Edizioni Mediterranee, I think the publishing from Rome. Anyway, wished to be anonymous. All the other scientists involved with this whole thing wished to be anonymous. They consisted, here it says, of numerous antennae, free composed of mysterious metals which receive light and sound signals on every wavelength. Direction finder for tuning to a particular time and place, a screen, and a recording device. Ernetti described how, crowded after their invention, the time team watched speeches by Mussolini, Napoleon, and scenes from ancient Rome, including a performance of Tiestes, a lost place of Quintus Ennius, one of Rome's most important authors. But that's where the controversy comes, when the experts say that some things didn't fit the timeline, some Latin ways of saying certain things. But I mean, although nobody saw the Chronovisor itself, Ernetti did provide evidence of these televisual travels, for example, publishing fragments of Tiestes in Latin. Now, the Tiestes was an incomplete, it was never completed in the sense that we only received fragments. He published the entirety at one point of this important Latin text. Then on May 2, 1972, a big thing happened. The Italian magazine La Domenica del Corriere, which was very popular magazine at the time, and no longer exists, but I remember reading it at my relatives down in Sicily, because it was a very popular magazine with a lot of curiosities, a lot of weird stuff on it, but always very accurate, wasn't made up stuff. So they published what should have been Ernetti's trump card, a chronovisor image of the crucified Christ. The team had viewed his last days in their entirety, from the Last Supper to the final agonizing moments, and had retained the photo as a powerful souvenir. But at that point, the controversy erupted, because another magazine revealed that Christ was a reverse image of a postcard from the Santuario dell'Amore Misericordioso in the town of Colle Valenza, in Umbria, I think. More recently, doubt has been cast on its transcription of Tiestes, and an apparent deathbed confession has also surfaced. It is time to add Holy-Oxer to Ernetti's accomplishments. But is that really the case? Now let's go and debunk the debunker, because what happened is very interesting. You will expect, if this whole thing was a fraud, the Vatican to not react. Instead, after the publication in La Domenica del Corriere and the fact that this image they claim was a fake, the one on the left I'm talking about, not the one on the right, which is supposed to be, I think, the original. Anyway, a few days after the publication, the image was debunked, because they said that it was the postcard reproduced a real work of art, a wooden crucifix sculptured in 1931 by the Spanish artist Lorenzo Culó Valera. The statue can still be found today in this sanctuary, which is near Perugia. It's actually in Todi, in Todi, this place where you can go and see this image. So it's a place I know very well. Me and my wife went there. Very nice place. Very nice place. Eat great food. Great place. Anyway, I have, all my book covers are actually made in Umbria by an artist from Perugia who now resides in Terni. So I'm very connected to Umbria. Umbria is in old times it was part of the larger Tuscany, Grand Tuscany, then Granducato di Toscana. Then it became, of course, a separate region, but it is always in my heart because since I was a little kid, I always went there, and then I worked in Umbria many times with my work as a DJ and as a record producer. So I have many friends there, and I delivered presentations of all my books in Perugia. So it's definitely a town I like very much. Anyway, when Father Ernetti was confronted with the proof that his photograph of Christ was actually a picture of a wooden sculpture, but they never told us what this was. What is this? Anyway, what did Padre Ernetti do? Padre Ernetti reacted saying that the Spanish sculptor who did the Color Valera, who carved the crucifix in 1931, received he did it through the visions of Madre Esperanta, who he argued had received these genuine visions of how Jesus looked. So the sculpture had captured the true face of Christ. That is how Father Ernetti answered. He didn't say it was a fake. He simply said they had a similar image because it was in some way, no? Now, the official reaction of the Vatican at this point. The Catholic Church, at this point, there was an official reaction. So let's talk about the official reaction of the Catholic Church, because up until the publication in 1972 on the Domenica del Corriere, let's say that the Vatican had maintained a relatively low profile on the whole thing. But after there was this whole debunking of the photo, the ecclesiastical authorities were forced to intervene to protect what they say is the doctrine and the public order. Because when this article this article, you see, which I just showed you, appeared, it was a big thing. So, how did the Vatican react? In 1988, the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is basically the modern Inquisition, they decided to issue a formal decree. Now, to issue a formal decree, it means that there must be something behind this whole thing. And I tell you, it's very interesting because it was an immediate lata sententia excommunication for anyone who revealed or spread recordings or news obtained through instruments capable of capturing the past. Now, you have to understand, how is it possible? I repeat, how is it possible that no, it seems the matter of science fiction. It's absolutely incredible. It's like a sci-fi movie. But why did the Vatican, after this article came out saying, I have the evidence, the machine that photographs the past is a reality, the Chronovisor, why did the Vatican do something? If this machine didn't exist, they didn't need to make a decree of excommunication for people using news or recordings through instruments capable of capturing the past. It's almost like confirming, you don't excommunicate somebody for something that hasn't been done. If it was a fraud, the Vatican would say it's simply a fraud. Instead, the Vatican goes and creates an official decree in 1988. You can still find it in the canon law, where they forbid and excommunicate anybody who uses this kind of information. At the same time, the superiors of the Benedictine order, the order of Father Ernetti, ordering absolute silence for the rest of his life. From that moment on, under penalty of severe canonical sanctions, Father Ernetti could no longer grant interviews. Father Ernetti could no longer grant interviews or make public statements about the Chronovisor. He will have to maintain this silence for the rest of his life. So, Father Ernetti spent the final years in his life in Venice, in this beautiful city of Venice, which he loved, because even if he came from Rocca Santo Stefano, which is 12 kilometers from Subiaco, I used to go to school with many people from Rocca Santo Stefano who used to tell me these stories about Father Ernetti. So I actually, 15 years ago, a guy called Augusto Micozzi, known as Augusto il Fornaro from Subiaco, one day comes to me and says, tells me, I have a document I found in Santa Scholastica that proves that the Chronovisor of Father Ernetti existed. He showed me this document. They actually sent it to me. I don't know, I have it in my archives in Italy. I wish I had it now, but this document found in the library of Santa Scholastica, which is a very important library of the church, with a tradition. It was the library, it was the place that published the second ever book in the world and the first one in Italy, because the German monks that published the first book in the world then brought the same technique in Italy, in Santa Scholastica. So Santa Scholastica is an historic place. Ratzinger went there before becoming Pope. Some very important texts are kept there rather than in the Vatican Apostolic Library or in the Vatican Archive. Now, Father Ernetti spent his final years of his life in Venice, and he died on April 8, 1994. Agostino Gemelli, who lived with him, that initial experience, because this whole thing started also with Father Agostino Gemelli, who was he was a very pragmatic individual. Gemelli died, unfortunately, a lot earlier, a long time earlier. He died in 1959. The will of Father Ernetti came out in 2002. The French essayist François Brun published a book revealing an alleged will that was given to one of Ernetti's nephews, a letter that claimed that on his deathbed he confessed the entire story of the Chronovisor, and everything else was a complete fabrication, but that was never something that came out of the Catholic Church of the Vatican. It came out from a guy in 2002, a French essayist, who claimed to have received from one of Ernetti's nephews without really providing evidence for his debunking claim. In the meantime, the story about the Chronovisor was becoming more and more popular. I want to show you before we end up today's broadcast, the actual, and this is the actual project of the Chronovisor drawn by Father Ernetti. Here, let me show it. Here it is. Let me see if I can. Seems to be an issue with. Let me see if the issue is the format, but I don't think so. For some reason it wouldn't let me show you this. It's weird, guys, because I have it in front of me. Let's see if I can maybe use another. This is really weird. Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, here we are. This is the actual Chronovisor, and it's a sketch of Father Ernetti, his invention, and how it was put together, all the various elements that I described earlier. Regarding Marconi, he was also involved with the Ray of Death, but that's another story. We might talk about it another time. In the meantime, before I go, I want to, of course, finish here with this incredible story of Father Ernetti, because I repeat, if it was a fraud, why did the Vatican feel the urge to pass such an important, official promulgation of the Catholic Church, excommunicating everybody that uses a similar or that instrument? I mean, there is a lot of doubt about what happened, but we know for sure that the Father Gemelli experience with Father Ernetti was absolutely proven. It's a real experience. The fact that they captured this voice of the dead in some way, it's not, and it's well known. I mean, you can go even on your AI and ask them, But the two were absolutely genuine about that experience. It says here, Father Agostino Gemelli and Father Pellegrino, two prominent Italian figures who lived intersecting in one, and then they talk the connection between the two priests peaks in September 1952 at the physics laboratory of the Catholic University of Milan. Father Ernetti was working with Father Gemelli to record Gregorian chants on a wire recorder. The wire kept snapping, frustrating Father Gemelli. Exasperated, Gemelli looked up and invoked his deceased father, and then the voice was recorded on the tape. Of course, I will help you. I am always with you. So this specific led to the creation, of course, of serious, rigorous scientific studies on the electric voice phenomena by Padre Gemelli, when instead Ernetti took his own experience and created with it the Chronovisor. There is, many years later, somebody called Father Andreas Resch. Father Andreas Resch will create the faculty of paranormology in the Vatican. But this is another story for another time. I want to thank all those people who today have made this show possible by purchasing my books. We heard a lot about the Jeffrey Epstein case recently. There has been actually this journalist who apparently has suffered attack from a magnetic attack. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, because this is a rather incredible and fascinating story that very few people are reporting on. reporter who investigated Jeffrey Epstein is fleeing the US after alleged direct energy weapons attack. So this journalist claims that who has reported extensively on late financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein notorious New Mexico ranch, says she's fleeing the country, claiming she was the victim of a direct energy weapon attack. Alisa Paldes Rodriguez, a former Boston Globe and Los Angeles Times reporter who later became a best-selling novelist, said she abruptly abandoned her New Mexico residence after suffering what she described as symptoms of the Havana syndrome, which I've discussed, by the way, extensively in volume 8 of my confession, which is a book I strongly suggest you get. Aside from, of course, the rise and fall of a Frankist monster, which is still very much a relevant book for the times we are living now. And I thank all of you who also give the right attention to volume 12 of my confession, which is the last book of my confession series, and it's really the most relevant because you are right on top of the pyramid where the old seeing eye is, to know all the secrets of the most powerful order of the Catholic Church, the Jesuits. So the history, secrets, societies, and the politics of the Jesuit New World Order and the Luciferian court. This is a very important book. Then I also suggest you purchase my wife's cookery book. Zegami Family Cookbook is a great way to transform your kitchen in a 5-star Italian restaurant. This book has been also left a lot of positive reviews because it's explained in a simple way, so you can actually become a great chef thanks to Christie's instructions, which are given a very defined and clear way. So you don't get confused. You have very clear instructions. You can build some great recipes, and you can do it in your home rather than giving a lot of money to restaurants, which these days are serving you with the stuff which is often quality is not really matching the price you're paying, because of course the cost of life is rising and the quality is going down. Okay, thank you again to KB Lan, Jim, yes, Grutzmarker, Yu Uzumaki, Peter Proksch. Thank you to our sponsors. You can help us with GoFundMe. You can also find my Cash App handle on leozagami.com. If you like this show, please subscribe to my channels and put like. We need to grow, guys. These channels are not growing. We need to grow because we are about to deliver the best information ever on how the Vatican is controlling the whole UFO, UAP disclosure. We are about to publish a book which is gonna be really something incredible. It's not because, I've written this book, because this book, guys, deserves your attention. The Vatican Top Secret Alien Agenda, Hidden Encounters, Forbidden Rituals, and Jesuit Astronomers in the Age of UFO Disclosure will be out in the second week of June, and you need to be the first one to read it, and you will thank me for it. Trust me. It's not like all this other stuff, all these charlatans, imposters, and puppeteers that, of course, are hiding you the truth. Well, we will finally expose them all. Take care, guys. Have a great week.
Illuminati want my mind, soul, and my body. Secret society, trying to keep it on.
just created one of the most unexpected moments in the luxury automotive world.